Well, welcome to this. So in 2017, how do I top that of like throwing everything on the ground? Because that's normally me. In 2017, I got together with a couple of my colleagues on campus, and they're up here, Molly Kyle and Veronica Irvin. And Molly is an arsenic specialist, so that's like arsenic and health are her things. And I, being an extension agent, really enjoy working with people. I want to be out in the field. The last thing I really want to be doing is like research in like a lab and counting and doing data analysis. And we got together with Veronica, who's a behavior change specialist. And the three of us kind of had this dream of how do we kind of develop a protocol and a navigator program for well owners, and then how do we like tie that to dollars and cents? Because in Oregon, we don't have a statewide well water program, and we desperately need one. So just we kind of got together and submitted a grant to NIEHS, and in that grant, they rejected it the first time, they rejected it the second time, and in 2019, they funded it, this grant. And basically it was to create a well water navigator protocol that we could share. And they still told us we were a little crazy on that last grant round. They said, we really want to see if you can do it. So I am from Oregon State University, and it is a very unique state to work in because we have from very, very shallow wells, coastal wells, to the high desert. So on average, the area that I work in, that's really where Oregon State University's big white dot in, and all those surrounding counties, we can have wells that are 20 feet deep, technically not a legal well in our state, all the way up to 800 feet. And these are just domestic wells. So it's huge. And across the state, we have a lot of micro regions. And so this really has affected a lot of our well owners because in some cases, when we look at like central and eastern Oregon, they may only get 12 to 20 inches of precipitation every year. And some of the areas that get 12 inches, there's not a lot of recharge going on for those aquifers. They're really deep, and we're a very volcanic state. So we have a lot of arsenic as the deeper you get. And then kind of my region, the deeper you get, there's arsenic. The shallower you are, the more likely you are to hit an old salt bed. So just kind of this like very weird combination. And then you get kind of on that coastal range, and we have about 200 inches of rain that fall on the western slopes of that. So it's so broad and vast. We really were trying to drill down as can we develop a program that could be expanded and work for everybody across the state, and lots of other people could use it. This was mentioned yesterday multiple times. We do have a real estate transaction law. So if a domestic well is on a property and that property changes hands, there has to be a test for arsenic, nitrate, and coliform bacteria. The seller's also supposed to submit these results to the state Oregon Health Authority. Compliance on this law is crap. So it's great, we have this law. About 20% of home sales that have domestic wells are actually getting this done and submitting results. Probably a little bit more actually doing the test. But as you guys know, even though you get these lab reports, in our state, most of the labs that are doing this private testing basically are using they'll put a pass and fail on there. Well, we know that pass and fail doesn't mean anything to a domestic well owner. And unfortunately, we also have a huge influx of new Oregonians coming into our state. A lot of folks that have only ever lived urban, and they're moving to Oregon for this small farm dream. It is not a dream typically. It turns into a nightmare very rapidly. So we were looking at this study because we really wanted to develop some sort of protocol. In extension, we are out working with individuals all the time, and we develop kind of a strategy is tailored to each person that we're working with based upon their needs. So how could we develop something that could be expanded out, something that might elicit behavior change? Because as we all know, we can tell people to test over and over and over, and that doesn't mean they're going to. What's going to actually encourage them to not just test their water, but then also if there's a problem, make those changes. Because we've all heard that it hasn't killed me yet. It looks fine, it smells fine, it's great. So we did a little pilot project just to kind of suss out this protocol of what kind of questions did we need to ask, what would make someone really want to test their water, and then if you find something wrong, how does somebody perceive risk? Like, what's going to be the difference? So we did a little small pilot where I got 10 people that had tested positive for arsenic well over the MCL, and we did the pilot kind of in the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. So really I spent a lot of time looking at my Zoom camera as we did a pilot, because unfortunately we all got to go home and experience that wonderful joy of COVID. So that really helped us develop the why. And we wanted to know from those individuals, we kind of knew why we wanted to do it, but we were really looking at what is going to connect people, what's really going to make some sort of long-term change. So this kind of came down to our top 4, and we decided that we wanted to look at arsenic, nitrate, and because there's so many older homes in our area, and we were already going to be doing mail-in testing, we talked to our lab and included lead, because we talk about lead quite often in Oregon, but we didn't actually have any data because lead isn't included in that real estate transaction law. So really, I just wanted to work with well owners. Like, that's what I want to do, right? That's the fun part for me. And then take that data, give it to my team, my partners in crime, and say, did I do it right? Is it working? So really, for them, they were like, this is basically a community health navigator model. We're just going to change it to work with well owners. So we had to do some material development, because all of us, as we look across, different universities have different information. It can be the same sort of information, but it's not super consistent, and we wanted it to kind of be a one-stop shop. What is the contaminant? Where does it come from? How do I figure out if I have it? What's the levels I should be concerned about it? And then also try and really detail treatment options, because nitrate and arsenic are the 2 hardest to treat. And in our area, the reason it's so hard to treat is that we also have really hard water. We have a lot of iron, we have a lot of hydrogen sulfide, and people are so worried about treating that they'll say, well, I bought an extra filter. I bought an arsenic filter on the internet. I bought a nitrate filter on the internet. And we say, did you test the water after you installed that? And they're like, no, because I bought it on the internet. It works. So we had to go through this kind of material development phase, and that's one of the things that Extension is really good at, is to kind of pull all the information we needed together and then work on creating what we needed and kind of piloting that information. So our biggest thing was, we wanted to kind of look at our ecological model, wow, it just left, and really say, like, with Extension, what are the norms that we're seeing? What are the different pieces that we need to pull into these publications and then add to the protocols? So when we're talking, we can have teach-back moments, because I've been through some intervention trainings and protocol trainings, and I'm sure some of you have been too, and it kind of feels very robotic. You're asking those questions in the same exact order. Well, in this model, you are still asking the same questions, but you might get there more organically. So you're doing a teach back moment, but then you go back to another question. You're still following the protocol, but you're using kind of that extension method of making folks feel comfortable. We're not regulatory. You can tell us all sorts of things. So much so, I don't ever want to live with a well. I know too much now, right? Like, sometimes knowledge is not as much power as you want it to be. So our biggest aims for this research project was to do that treatment decision-making, those materials, and then to do a randomized control trial with 2 different arms. Originally we had 3 arms, but that changed a little bit. And so we had our first one was, let's develop these materials, and how do we do this? Now, it is important to note here that if we tried to get this money for this, kind of getting told you're crazy, well, water is not something we provide funding for, health information. These are 2 things that don't go together very commonly. So our award came through in April of 2020. And it was a 4-year award. And they said, you need to spend the first little bit developing materials. So you need to go out in the community and do focus groups. everybody wanted to hang out together in April of 2020, didn't we? So we had to go through this kind of in a different fashion. So the first thing we did was create kind of like our logic model of like, what do we really want? And we want to share this with people and see if they're interested too, because we wanted to get not just community people in focus groups. We wanted folks that participated in our different health departments. It was really hard in April, May, and June of 2020 to get anybody at a health department to have a conversation with us. So we were really struggling with that. So we sent this out, our logic model, and we actually had a lot of people reach out. They were like, hey, we're really slammed right now. Can we do a focus group later? So we moved on to working with our kind of our target group. So we actually had focus groups with about 250 individual well owners across the state. We worked through the Grange system primarily and through some of our known groups, some of our master gardener groups that were desperate to get on a Zoom to have a conversation with us. But we really wanted to explore both English-speaking and Spanish-speaking groups, which really came in handy. And we developed these guides. So this is just kind of what is the element. We did it for arsenic, nitrate, and lead. So these are full color. They come in English and Spanish, and they're also written at the 6th grade level. So we really went through and pared it down, and we're very, there's a lot of photos. So for everything you see in a paragraph form, there's also a graphic form within that. And then those apparently were so popular with our Oregon Health Authority when we sent them out for peer review after we made changes. You know, this is a long process. There's a lot of edits. We go back and forth. We sent them to Oregon Health Authority and a couple of our other folks within the state, and they said, yeah, we don't want you just to test these materials. Can you please launch them right now? We want to use them. So we had 3 arms. And we shrunk 2 of our arms because we didn't need to test these educational pieces anymore. This is what we were going with. So you can see that there's a little bit of a difference here just in the covers. So that was based upon our Spanish-speaking focus groups and our English-speaking focus groups. Our folks in the English-speaking groups were like, we just want kind of a plain cover. We want to open it up and dive in. Our Spanish-speaking groups were like, we really need you to relate. We needed to see a nice full color picture. We want to know how it relates to us. So these were kind of the photos that rose to the top. So then, Arm 2, we really developed that kind of protocol program, which I'm happy to always share with anybody, but we did really individualized feedback. That's how we designed it. We wanted it to be very individual to the family. Do they have pets? Do they have livestock? Do they run a business on their property? Is it a commercial farm? Is it just a small 1.5 acre small farm dream? So we put those all together, and then we started recruiting well owners. And recruiting well owners in our state is a unique experience. So we started in our Jackson County area, and we picked that area because it's in Southern Oregon, a lot of arsenic, a lot of nitrate in some pockets, and we were like, we're gonna start here. And we sent out 5,000 letters the exact same day that Oregon Department of Forestry released a wildfire risk assessment map that caused a bunch of insurance companies to cancel people's insurance. And that map, unfortunately, had OSU logo at the bottom. So if you can imagine what it was like for these folks to also receive a letter that said, we invite you to let us onto your property and give us some information about you and provide a well water sample. We got a lot of interesting no's. But as we expanded throughout, we did Jackson, we did Josephine, and then we opened it up statewide. You can kind of see these numbers. What was really interesting to me was that, we did have an extensive survey. This was not a quick, like, are you a well owner? This was probably 20 pages they had to click through because we were measuring things like their current health, their health, their family's health, pets' health, all sorts of questions. So as someone who worked in extension, I looked at that survey and I said, oh, hell no. Is this what you guys do in health? Is this how public health works? No wonder nobody wants to come to your thing. And that was the nice way of me being like, can we just pare down a couple questions? Like just a couple? Is this one really important? But you see, we did have people that said, yes, we'll absolutely do it. My favorite part, though, is the 4 that we excluded because they made it through all those surveys. They consented, and then they said, we actually don't have water to test. Like, we don't have a well on our property, or one was a spring. So I was very confused by this, but I also was not the person that was having those conversations. But we did have 1,500, a little over, complete everything. They were mailed a kit. The kit included postage, so it was mailed directly back to the lab. Anybody who struggled taking the samples or needed help, we also did that. We had a navigator that would go out. In the end, only 98 were eligible for our control trial, and we did, because it was a health-based grant, anything that was a positive result for arsenic, nitrate, or lead, if it wasn't over what we consider those MCLs, they didn't qualify, but we did provide information for those people under, because we know that under is also something that they should be concerned about. So they also got mailed our publications and such. But those 98 that were eligible, we went through the trial. These were our 2 arms. So you can see usual care is really, you get a 1-800 number, you get a little book that says you're a well owner, here's the law in the state of Oregon. And then we provided them our water treatment guides and then financial aid resources. I will say that financial aid resources were not taken up by most individuals, even, it doesn't matter the arm. So the big difference with Arm 2 is they got to meet with an extension navigator. So we had 2 navigators, I was one, and then we had a second one that was based in Jackson County, and each participant met with us 1 to 3 times. The idea was 3 meetings. A lot of people, depending upon the navigator, were done in 2, and they had like check-ins with email, or they might have a phone call, but they didn't need like a full, like, let's have a 1-hour Zoom meeting and rehash everything. They did a meeting, they checked in, and we really talked about like where things come from, what's the risk. So kind of this group. And then the thing they left every meeting with was an action plan. And that action plan might have been just as simple as, I'm gonna talk to my family member. So to verify, we had to do some fidelity studies at the end and ask those people, did this actually work? Did you make changes? So after each session, as a navigator, I would go in and fill out a survey that kind of listed what we talked about. Did we talk about a contaminant? Did we do an assessment? Was an action plan created? What was that action plan? So this was after every one, so we could see if they were following the action plan, which, let's be honest, we all are real humans, and so you create an action plan, and the next meeting, half of that action plan may become your new action plan. So then other folks, after they were done, they got, all those participants also got a survey after the end of their navigation session. And so of the 60 sessions that we recorded, this was kind of an interesting thing for our behavior change piece, is that really like talking about their well consumption patterns was big, and then treatment options. That was kind of the big thing. And you see that definitely people were like, oh yes, she made us do an action plan every single time. And then it was followed up with an email that said, here's the action plan you committed to. So then, we did 16 different components that we evaluated for fidelity. These are the 6 that did not meet 100%. And of these, 4 of them were 87.5% and 1 was at a 75%. So still very good fidelity as far as like that research piece goes. My favorite was where things didn't happen. Because I was like, wait, that was me. I'm sure that happened. But their perception that it wasn't. So those are like really good for us to kind of look back at and say, what could we improve? And I can absolutely provide all 16 of the metrics that we used. And then what was the intervention piece? Like what were they really taking home? And these were all, pretty interesting to look at as someone who was doing the program, but also very happy that it represented that we were actually making a difference. Like people were making changes. They were having these conversations with their family if they needed to. And this is one that's an interesting because the discussed treatment options with family, the 3 that aren't there is someone who, the data scientist isn't going to look at that. Those were 3 people that lived on their own. They were single. So they didn't have somebody to discuss it with, and so that absolutely makes sense. So we do have this protocol. We have it ready to share. We can scale it up. You can scale it down. And we've also added things like digital tools. So we have an app that actually has all the publications. They can put in their test results, and it moves through the process with them to help them determine, is there a risk level for anybody in your family? and what treatment could you provide? And then, longer term, kind of that next piece. Oh, I mentioned challenges, that wildfire map, and then RCAP, because it's RCAP. And RCAP created a lot of challenges for our logic model team, because when you said if somebody says no, they don't get to do the next question, our RCAP said, oh, they said no, they still have to answer the next question. So there was a lot of interesting data that we had to change. So currently we're working on that cost utility piece. So like if you invest in a well water person, or you invest in somebody who can help navigate, whether regionally, statewide, what is the benefit? What's the environmental benefit? Can we reduce healthcare costs long-term? So we have this, Steve would recognize this graphic. This is one of my favorite ones, when people really are like, oh, it doesn't cost that much if you get sick from well water. And I'm like, just this one? But there are so many other things like cancer, like stuff you can't put a pin on, so reducing your risks. We also now have successfully started to use this with coliform bacteria testing. That obviously, with the way testing works, coliform bacteria is a little more tricky than something you can just mail off. And then our Aspire Center is actually using it for radon now, to do radon education. So that we're just really working on, like, can we give you dollars and cents? Because we all know that when you're saying you're advocating for a program, if you can figure out dollars and cents saved, even if it's just a good round number, we invest $100,000 in somebody, and they can save us this much money in healthcare costs and infrastructure. So things like septic systems. At least 3 septic systems in this program were pumped during that time that were basically on the verge of failing. And that's a big savings. In Oregon, it's about $45,000 to put in a new septic if you live anywhere near shallow groundwater. So that's like a very big savings just immediately, not considering the environmental health damage. So that's it. I don't even know if he was paying attention to the time. He just let me go.
Well, it's because it's 15 minutes.
I mean, I know, but there's questions.
I've lost
Uh-oh, okay.
I can't see the question.
I can see them, so I think we're good. Are there resources for homeowners on where they can have their water tested? Oregon Health Authority has a list of private labs that serve Oregon. All of our OSU Extension Service offices have them, and then our statewide site has them. So everybody shares those. I will say that it is, there are locations within our state that it's a solid 6 to 8 hours to drive to a lab, depending upon where you live. So just driving across Oregon can be 15 hours. And our highest population centers are kind of on the west side, and that's also where most of the labs are based. Steve can come to Oregon, absolutely. I can help out with that. We can have a conference. I know a good conference center. I would recommend not in Portland, though. If you fly to Portland, go south to like Corvallis or Salem, much cheaper down there. Any actions for the government to take when home sellers don't comply with the property transfer law? It has been tried multiple times in my 20-year career for there to be some teeth added to that law, and it dies in committee every single time. There's very little extra regulation or penalties when you live in Oregon that somebody will add to a law. Even now, like if somebody's violating things under like our Oregon Department of Ag and they're discharging, they get a lot of fix-it tickets that don't have actual like monetary assignments there. So if you ever see something someone in Oregon's been fined for something, they probably didn't actually comply with anything for multiple years. Like it's a very long process. We are absolutely planning to scale this program. We've continued to seek some funding, but funding is interesting right now for this type of thing. The nice part in Oregon is that we are actually part of our program right now is currently part of a House bill that is sitting in our Ways and Means Committee that would provide $5 million to our well regulatory agency to do grants and loans for new wells, repairs and replacements. and also $5 million to our DEQ program to do the same thing for septic systems. And because they don't, again, they want to invest and keep that infrastructure healthy, it includes $2.5 million to OSU Extension to create a statewide well water program. And if you participate in a grant or loan program with the other two, you have to go through an educational session at least. It's about 3 hours, so kind of the basics. So that would be amazing. And I use this protocol to walk most of my homeowners through. Like, this is kind of how we start the conversation for almost anybody who reaches out to me that really is in a longer term situation with some sort of contaminant. And Elsa mentioned that we have a well testing program that we're currently doing that's more hyper-local to our region. And we did 450 tests in the last 3 months. And so now those people are all in educational sessions. And so we're talking about their results. And we don't provide them the lab copy of their results. We have an interpretation sheet that goes with it, so it does not say pass or fail. And we use 2 labs in Oregon in our region. One is Edge, that just got bought out by Eurofins, and they still have the pass-fail. And the other one is a small local lab in Salem, and they do not. They actually use OSU Extension and other kind of a different way to say it. So they do not have a pass-fail. They say, this is your thing, and this is what an MCL is, but you're a domestic well owner. So they have a whole separate one that they provide, which I greatly appreciate. We use tax assessor data to locate our private well owners. That's typically how we start. So we are OSU Extension. We are part of the county because of that county funding piece. So we can actually request from the tax assessor all of the rural properties with codes with houses on them and not houses. It's not an exact science for sure, but if anybody knows where someone lives with a well, it's going to be the tax man. The bad publicity, that was a hard one. Part of it was that we moved to a different county that also still was kind of affected, and then we went statewide. But really it was having conversations with folks that called. And I know there were a lot of people who threw that letter in the mail. You know, they just threw it in the recycle or burned it or whatever, and were like, we're not participating. We did get some ones that were covered in other messages back to us that we put in our file for like, oh, that was so nice of them to write me back. But you know, you're also offering a free well test. So you're offering a service, and you're always gonna have a percentage. And I think 1,500 was a lot of people to get in a pretty short amount of time, because we were really doing that sampling in about 6 months, 6 to 9 months. So we probably did 1,250 tests during that time. So I'm sure Edge loved us. And I'm definitely happy to share all of our resources in English and Spanish. All of our OSU Extension stuff that's from our well water program, I except for this where we have 2 publications, when I publish, I do side by side 2 columns. 1 column is English and 1 column is Spanish. And in Oregon, we're a very white state. Our landowners are over the age of 55 typically and white. It's probably less than 3% of land is actually owned by people of color. But we also wanted to make sure that we were covering our smaller landowners, and then we had stuff that was available for farm workers to just have that information and have access to that information, because we have a very high number of farm workers, and then also our renters. So even though they don't necessarily, there's no laws that, it just says they have, landowners have to, renters can just, they have to have access to potable water. So, and there's no definition for potable, so we want to make sure that that was helpful for our renting population. Nice. So anybody who'd like to be connected with practices for RCAP, I'm happy to have you talk to Veronica Urban. Again, I got to do the fun stuff, and RCAP wasn't the fun stuff. The IRB and the RCAP, not the fun stuff. Human subject research, no. Love working with someone who has that ability to do that and that wherewithal. That's the joy of a partnership. But building RCAP, our surveys was really tough. So Veronica has a whole publication, or not publication, presentation she's done on lessons learned that I'm sure she'd be happy to share with everybody. And then private wells are unregulated. Water quality wise, do you think the lack of wells being tested during real estate transactions, even with the requirement, is a result of mixed messaging? Yes, and also really poor real estate agents. We have our turnover in Oregon of real estate agents, they turn over about 50%. So we're actually in the process of working with the State Realtors Association to develop training that they get. So we will have both webinar and in-person training, and then an online Canvas course that they have to go through for continuing education credits. And it's not just me, we do about 2 or 3 trainings per year with our small farms program, because we also have a lot of people selling property, rural property, that have no idea what a well and septic is, so things are changing hands without inspections. You just get a home inspection, you're not getting other things inspected. And then also just blatantly like saying, yes, you could grow this crop here, or you have water rights because you have a domestic well, and that's not how that works. So we have a lot of folks that have moved in, mostly from California in the last 5 or 6 years, 10 years. And now after a year or 2, they find themselves reaching out to us because they're frustrated because they purchased something that does not match what they thought they were buying. I think that was it.